whatever people are collecting should be at face value what they're collecting. And it should not be any like promise of something or like some confusing like roadmap to pitch to like to confuse people into thinking that this has more value than it does. Like all of that shit is the reason why NFTs crashed before. And I think that we have an opportunity now to like kind of start from zero, especially on layer two on base, where the collections that will succeed, in my opinion, are the ones that have the strong ethos and also are not like selling you snake oil. Like when you mint swatches, you are like when you collect swatches, you know what you're collecting. I'm not sitting here telling you that if you hold this for 6 months, there's going to be a token or something like that, or like any other like type of utility roadmap stuff. Like I have my own plans for the future, but I'd never want anyone to collect the NFT with this like speculative mindset in mind, because that takes away from what the ethos of the art project is in the first place.
Episode 56 of Invest in Music with jvmi from Swatches. Today we're here to talk about his on-chain art collection and one of the first collections on the base layer 2. As a reminder, you can collect this episode on investinmusic.xyz. We got into a lot of great concepts about art on layer 2, swatches, and much, much more. Without further ado, let's get into it. Episode 56 of Invest in Music with jvmi of Swatches. All right, we are back. We got the man, the myth, the legend, jvmi, the artist behind Swatches, live on the podcast. How are you feeling today, man?
Doing pretty well, bro. How about you?
Doing well. This is definitely a very exciting episode for me. I've been an admirer of your work from afar, big collector of swatches, and excited to dive into the project. But before we do, why don't you go ahead and give a quick background on yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So traditionally, like I've been an artist my whole life. I've been like drawing and like doing creative stuff my whole life. But as for like the past 4-ish years is when I really like took a dive into like Web3 and crypto. Initially, like before the like 2021 hype cycle, I was working as a software engineer before, but I started working at like a crypto NFT startup, which is essentially like a dev studio that we use to launch other artists NFT projects. And I really like got my experience with NFTs with that company. And like during my time there, and before my time there too, my main goal like entering Web3 was to become an NFT artist. Like that was my like main draw to like everything crypto, everything Web3. I had a bunch of friends that were like crypto traders and like more into DeFi. And I remember one of my homies showed me like OpenSea.io in like 2020 and was like, dude, look at this website. You should put your shit on here. And yeah, ever since that, I've just been like really like pushing and trying to make it as an NFT artist. So I worked at that crypto company for about a year, and then I left that company after like trying to do some NFT work there, but it didn't really work out with the lifestyle I was living at that company. The job was pretty demanding, so I took another job. I work at OP Labs right now, and ever since I've been working there, it's opened up a lot of doors to another like ecosystem with like the L2 stuff. My main draw with getting into that space was it seemed that the L2 like NFT space was super super underutilized. Like I remember when I joined Optimism, the only collection was OP Punks. So there was like basically no an NFT like like there was a small audience, but not a bunch of creators there. So I really saw it as an opportunity to try to like trailblaze and try to make some magic happen there. So my first collection at Optimism, or while I was working at Optimism, was this collection called Motorheads, which had a pretty big splash at the time. Like it was definitely one of like the premier collections on L2 or on the OPL2 at the time, and it was really sick. It was inspired by Frank Ocean, because I'm inspired by like a lot of different things with my art, whether it be music, culture, just like what's going on with the world. But Frank Ocean is like a goated artist in my opinion. So Motorheads was a collection inspired by that, and then it had a pretty good like response and stuff, but it wasn't really like all of my skills in one collection. It was more like my digital like artistry craft. But I always wanted to make a collection that combined code and art. So that's kind of where the idea for Swatches was born. I'd been working on Swatches for like 8 months before I dropped it, and it's seen a bunch of different cycles. But as bass started to heat up, I really like felt the need to put a bow on it and release it. And it's been super dope ever since.
What does it look like to want to be an NFT artist? Like when you came into the space, as someone who has a design background, what was it that really inspired you about wanting to be pursuing that as sort of like a career path?
Yeah, yeah. I think the main thing was like I saw NFTs at the time. I saw a bunch of artists that I really respected and admired from like the traditional art world getting into NFTs. So I have a background in streetwear as well, and one of the people that was one of the pioneers for like kind of bringing people in that culture into Web3 was Bobby Hundreds. He's
Mm-hmm.
the guy who founded the Hundreds, and he's been pretty big in the NFT space. He like wrote a couple books and has a pretty decent collection called Atom Bomb Squad. So I was a collector of Atom Bomb Squad because of Bobby Hundreds, and then I kind of began to like see what this space really is, and like kind of was inspired by a lot of the art and the aesthetic as well. Because one thing about NFTs is that the audience is instantly global. So anything I'd done before was primarily localized to like America and California because I'm based out in SF. So one of the things that was super dope that I saw about NFTs was like it is like an instant global audience. Like it's not like you're appealing to the people that you walk around and see every day. It's like you're creating for the world, right? So I think the main draw for that was like a bunch of reach you could get from being an NFT artist and like really touching the most amount of people possible. So I don't really know what it means to like be a successful NFT artist or be a real NFT artist. I mean, I guess anyone who makes art on chain is considered that, but those are like the main draws that I have for what I do.
Totally. And the reason I ask that is that I really admire the passion around creating art specifically for this new economy because a lot of the artists that we work with, we almost have to like convince them that being on chain is worthwhile. And they're definitely not NFT artists. In fact, they actually get
Right.
very offended when you say that this is a Web3 artist or something like that. I think that a lot of traditional musicians in this case are musicians primarily, and then dropping the music on chain is just another outlet for them. But I really
Right.
admire the way
Right.
that you position it because that's actually how I view it on my end. And what gets me really excited about supporting creators like yourself is when it becomes, a design space that you really want to leverage as the main focal point for the collection. Where in a lot of other
100%.
cases,
Yep.
like music, for example, the songs are on Spotify, they're on Apple Music. They might just so happen to be on a platform like Sound, but it's definitely not like the priority. And I feel like with you and your collections, you've really established yourself as like an on-chain creator. And I think it's very defining as a way to identify the significance around the collections that you've launched and sort of the passion that you put behind them.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think that's pretty accurate. And I mean, I definitely didn't start out this way, I'll say. Like I wasn't a traditional artist before. But I think like as I was saying, it was really when I worked at that like NFT creator studio that I began to see exactly what you're saying, where a lot of the artists we work with were traditional, like either music artists or digital artists. And I saw that those collections, it was uh I don't want to say extractive to the space, but like it seemed like it was more like the crypto portion of it was primarily like a money making thing for them, and they would like launch the project. The space was hot as fuck at the time, so like they would make like $1 million straight up, and then kind of just not really be present in the space afterwards. And I hated to see that because there's such a real community in collectors that are really tapped into like crypto stuff. So I hate when artists are more extractive to the space rather than like really being embedded in it and kind of like it's like synergy with the audience.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically I kind of relate it to like when artists like do a song for a movie where they're like contracted to, and
Mm.
it's kind of like a big paycheck, but then they don't really put their heart into it. It's kind of similar in a way.
Yeah. I definitely see both sides of it because I think on my end, it was very strategically smart to be leveraging 2021 as a time to release your art as NFTs. And if you were like in the right rooms, or you just knew the right people or something like that, like you said, you could literally make $1 million basically on the back of like 5 minutes if we're talking about like Nifty Gateway days. And
Hmm.
so I do agree with you that it was overall very extractive, but I also feel like there was not a good system in place for someone to want to lean in further if they wanted to, you know what I mean? Or like really
Oh,
like a
100%.
support
Yeah.
system for that or anything. And I guess the way that I would frame it on the other side, just to stick on this topic for 1 second, is like, you don't know anything about crypto. You've never touched MetaMask. You've never touched ETH. You make a couple pieces of digital art. All of a sudden, you made $1 million, and now you have this like really weird relationship with the space where it's like, okay, do I owe these people anything? On my
Yeah,
end, I was just
yeah,
releasing my art. Like when I put out music, obviously I promote it and I love it because it's like a vector, but I don't like owe people who stream my music anything. So it's kind of this very
right.
new paradigm of there being like a financial relationship with your collectors. And I think transparently, I think that most artists who were dropping in 2021 had just never had that before and had no clue what to do with it.
Right. Yeah, I definitely think that's true. I think that's even true today too. I mean, like, we're still super early in this space. Like, there's like a real the audience that you create for in this space is like there's like multiple different like user personas within that audience, right? Like as an artist, like the one that I'm going after is like people who are collecting my art for the sake of the art, and I'm like trying to connect on that level. But then due to the nature of like NFTs and like I think like the general like crypto audience surrounding that in general, people are like mostly traders. So then you also have like the people that are really just treating the piece as like a thing to flip,
Mm.
which I think everything kind of like the economy of NFTs, like all of that is necessary in order to push it forward. But yeah, I think definitely agree with you in the sense that creators, we need a way for creators to basically like understand what the landscape of it is and understand what they're creating for the communities that are consuming it.
Yeah, and I think that's the beauty of platforms like Farcaster that we'll obviously get into in a minute here. But I think before we get there, you mentioned, you're one of the first artists to put out a collection on Optimism. I'm actually also an OP punk holder. I think they're called Opti Punks or something. But I
Yeah,
just
yeah,
really
OptiPunk.
resonated with that because, there just was not like an NFT culture on layer two for a really long time. And I would argue like we're still in the very early stages of that. We
Yep,
had some early OP marketplaces. I think there was one called like Quixotic, if I remember correctly.
yep,
But
yeah,
to your
Quixotic.
point, it was like there just never was like the same level of interest in art and culture that we saw on mainnet or like Solana on these super chain L2s until more recently with, Zora launching their chain, with Base launching their chain. So just give me kind of like the background context on when you joined OP Labs and how you guys strategically thought about incubating and developing that art culture on these new layer twos.
Yeah, yeah, I'd love to talk about that. I mean, that was when I joined, I that was one of my main focuses, right? Because like there aren't many other NFT artists that are like involved directly with the Optimism project. So that was one of the main things that I was trying to push forward, at least from like a cultural perspective within. But like you mentioned, Quixotic was the first and main like NFT marketplace that was on Optimism, prior to like OpenSea even supporting Optimism. So back when I dropped my first collection, Motorheads, like that was the place. That was like the only website that you could trade, and mint stuff from the OP network. But I think it's like really changed now because, like you said, we're like there's this concept of the super chain and how like optimism is not just OP mainnet. We're really like this collection of other chains that are all kind of hopefully going to interact with each other in the future and kind of like it's like a larger system. So I think because there are more people involved and because this has become like a much bigger idea than just what optimism is in itself, we've seen that there are so many more creators that are interested in coming in because these chains create like different types of ethos, like they're like different islands basically for like different cultures that can emerge. So like base is obviously the one that's like leading right now, because like most people are looking at that due to just like the volume that's going on. But you even have other chains like Zora where like the the like feel and vibe of those NFTs are different than base because Zora NFTs is I kind of use Zora as like Instagram almost for NFTs, and then base is like what like the normal L2 what you would expect is. So I think because of this diversity of chains and audiences, we're seeing that there's just way more activity and way more like surface for people to create on, which is awesome.
It's very interesting. I like that analogy of Zora as like the on-chain Instagram. It actually just like made me go down a mental rabbit hole there that I'd love to unpack in a little bit. But I guess I want to kind
Sure.
of take us back to specifically Swatches, the main focus of this podcast episode. Talk to me about the process. You mentioned that you had been working on it for 8 months. Obviously you did a fantastic job of sort of seeding that channel and getting some really early interest in it. I think a lot of people would be interested to hear just kind of like the origin story and then maybe how you got it to launch and kind of where it is today.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So if I think back to like when I first started working on swatches, I was I was between like I didn't even necessarily want to launch another collection. But I was actually like stumbling upon stuff on OpenSea, and one of my like all-time favorite artists that I respect and I've really drawn a lot of inspiration from ever since I've come into the Web3 space is Snowfro.
Mm.
So I saw there was a collection that Snowfro had where it's like dash 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 by Snowfro. And when I was on that page, I was like scrolling into the description, and I think like a lot of people actually don't know this that are collectors of this collection or have seen it, but that collection has like keyboard controls that you can essentially like manipulate the art piece with keyboard controls. And I had never seen this before, and it's not like I saw this right when it dropped. Like I was kind of just lurking online and I saw it one day. And that concept, like understanding that you could do that with an NFT, and interactive NFTs had existed before, but like conceptually taking an art piece and just having like a layer of manipulation on top of it was really, really cool to me. So I think that moment is when like the idea of swatches kind of began formulating. So after I saw that, I was just like messing around, and like I wanted to create abstract art because a lot of the art that I had done before, like Motorheads, is very stylized. It's like 8-bit, like motorcycle helmet dudes. And the previous art that I have is like very, very stylized into like things that I'm specifically interested in, whether it be like streetwear or like culture and different stuff. So I Swatches was like a challenge in the beginning for me to like create a project that is like so simple, but it looks cool. So, and I wanted the focus of the art to be the motion involved and not the still image of what the actual swatch is. So I first wrote like a generation script that took in like a 3 by 3 grid and like generated all those shapes that you see today. And spent most of my time after that really like designing the craft and the experience of once you are on that page, what you can do with it.
Mm.
Because I wanted there to be like a bit of like shock factor almost that like what the swatch is when you actually click into the detail page, similar to like what I experienced with Snowfro's NFT. So I really like went wild with that, and most of the development for swatches was then a balance between like actually implementing it and then like figuring out how to conceptualize this thing, because I had a bunch of different ideas before where like you would like one idea was like you would mint the swatch and then there would be like other NFTs that are like the modes that you can see in them. So like you would like have your swatch and like load it into like this machine, like this metaphorical machine, and like you would be in square mode, and then you would like load it into a different machine and you would be like in hypnotic mode. But I decided to just put everything into the NFT and like not like kind of drip it out slowly. And I think it was a good decision. It was cool because swatches for me it's really like a prototype in a way for like the art that I want to continue doing, because it does illustrate all of my skills, because
Mm.
it's like there's like graphic design elements to it, there's like web development elements to it, and like just storytelling in general. So I really feel like swatches is the first collection that I've made that is a reflection of myself in a way. So that's basically what the story behind it is, but happy to like answer any specific questions that you have.
I guess I would just ask you to continue down that rabbit hole of like, what are your intentions for the vision of not only swatches, but your art in general? Like, I feel like this interactive art canvas is such a wide design space. Like, what are some potentialities that you get really excited about as it relates to the art and the on chain interactions around the art?
100%. Yeah. So like I think like specifically what you said, where like this interactive art landscape, I feel it, like all of the skills that I've developed up until now have positioned me to be both the artist and the developer. And I think there's a lot of power in that, because most times that like most NFT artists are not developers themselves, right? So like there is a gap between you communicating with someone with what your vision is and like them actually executing it, and like that cycle there, like anything that is like split between two people, there's stuff that's like lost in translation. So I really want to capitalize on both skill sets being in the same person and then seeing what comes out of that. So there's like two directions that I'm thinking of right now that I'll go down with swatches in particular, and then like interactive art in general. Obviously, there's a very minimal and distinct design aesthetic with swatches where you have like blobs and then like longer blobs and stuff like that. I was messing around yesterday and I like made a crypto punk in swatches style. So like doing stuff like that would be dope where they're like the style of swatches themselves is almost like a veil on top of reality, and like we can build a lot of stuff like that. And then also just interactive art in general outside of the swatches aesthetic. So like prior to releasing swatches, I had an idea of doing Motorhead's V2 on bass. So I would like basically like Motorhead's the metaphor for Motorheads is that they're like a Game Boy game. So I would make Motorheads V2 like a PS2 game or something, and like that would be the metaphor there. And the NFT itself for Motorheads would be interactive in the sense where you would be able to like click on the NFT, and since Motorheads are like motorcycle helmet guys, you would like it would like zoom out and it would be like a license with like the NFT as like the picture and like other shit on there. So like really just like honing in on the ability to make images interactive is what I'm interested in as well, outside of the swatches aesthetic. So I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying with the Motorhead stuff,
100%.
but yeah, that's like where my head's at with the future of what I want to do.
I think just a general comment I have is it's really refreshing to talk to you about your ambitions for the project because so much of my time the last 6 to 8 months has been downplaying and abstracting away the fact that these assets are on chain, the fact that these things are NFTs. I feel like in so much of the work that we do specifically with musicians, it's like, yeah, don't worry. Like they might be under NFTs under the hood, but you don't need to really worry about that. We don't have an expectation of you talking about it on Instagram because we know it's really polarizing. And it's just
Hmm.
refreshing to have this conversation because there is so much design space available for where you can take this art moving forward. And specifically when it is on layer two and you can do transactions to update metadata and all these things more efficiently that, yeah, just as a high level commentary, I appreciate you being really into the idea of what's possible here. Cause I feel like we have in a lot of ways moved away from like the same level of passion that I think on-chain art had during like 2021 when the market
Hmm.
was ripping, that it's great to kind of see it having a moment again and being able to surface in a really unique way.
Right, right. I mean that's the thing too is like I want to create art that is decoupled from the current market conditions,
Mm.
where like traditionally like when art existed before we brought it on chain, uh like the stock market didn't determine what the price of the Mona Lisa was, like
Yeah.
it's separate. And obviously there is like connectivity in nature to NFTs in the market, but I want to almost like what you're saying, where since the art is so natively embedded in the space, I almost want to make like a mini bubble within the space that is not affected by outside things, and we kind of like it grows to a point where it kind of stands on its own rather than being like a secondary related thing to like what the price of ETH is right now or something.
Yeah. And I do think in a lot of ways that's what early gen art has done well on ETH mainnet. If you look at Squiggles and you look at some of the collections that were on art blocks, those collectors
Yes.
very much do live in their own bubble. And that's a beautiful thing. I mean, you have the conference that goes on in Marfa and whatnot. And, I think that's one of the reasons why that art has historically held its market value so well, with relation to the price of ETH and everything else, because those collectors are a part of something that is unique and of itself. And I think for me, when I saw Swatches come out, it felt like a very defining moment because this, in my opinion, felt like one of the first L2 art collections that had the potential to develop that same level of trust and that same level of community around it that we had seen historically on mainnet, but now on this new canvas that is layer two and more specifically base.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I think that's like it's nice to hear you say that too, because that is kind of my intention with putting it out, in the sense where um Swatches is an NFT, but it's if you go on OpenSea right now and all of the other collections, like Swatches is very different from a lot of the other collections on base, because it is just art. And I think there's a lot of power in that. Like throughout my journey in Web3 and everything, like initially when I was working at that other company and I was working on a previous project, and there was a lot of like pressure on me to like create artificial value within the
Mm,
collection just to convince people to mint it. And it was like so backwards in my opinion. Like I have the belief that like you're like whatever people are collecting should be at face value what they're collecting, and it should not be any like promise of something or like some confusing like roadmap to pitch to like to confuse people into thinking that this has more value than it does. Like all of that shit is the reason why NFTs crashed before.
Mm.
And I think that we have an opportunity now to like kind of start from zero, especially on layer two on base, where the collections that will succeed in my opinion are the ones that have the strong ethos and also are not like selling you snake oil, you know, like
Yeah.
when you mint swatches, you are like when you collect swatches, you know what you're collecting. I'm not sitting here telling you that if you hold this for 6 months there's going to be a token or something like that, or like any other like type of utility roadmap stuff. Like I have my own plans for the future, but I'd never want anyone to collect the NFT with this like speculative mindset in mind, you know, because that takes away from what the ethos of the art project is in the first place. Um,
Man,
so so yeah,
it's very
that's like
powerful.
yeah, and I think we see that with the popular collections, right? Like you don't see Chromie Squiggles telling you there's going to be an airdrop. Like people are they're collecting Chromie Squiggles because it's Chromie Squiggles. And I
Yeah.
think like for future artists that especially are developing in the space, I think it's very tempting to like kind of ascribe external value to your work, so that you get more eyes on it and that like you know people are more excited about it. But I feel like it's super short-sighted, where you're going to shoot yourself in the foot where your art could have stood on its own, you know, like the only way you know that is just by putting it out there. And like if swatches like fails, or I mean I guess it's already released, but like if it had minted and like nobody minted it, I would have been okay with that because I put my all out there and I'm like communicating to the world what I want to communicate. And the response is completely like decoupled from what I'm doing. So, in like if Swatches was successful because of other reasons that wasn't for the art, I would feel bad about that because I'm not going to be
Hmm.
able to uphold that. But I can stand on everything right now and say, yes, Swatches is what I put out there. So I don't know. It's a little bit of an aside just for like, I guess we were talking previously about like NFT, people like creating NFTs for like, and kind of confusing for like the reason that they're doing it and stuff. But
Yep.
I do think that the space is super noisy, but you know, we can simplify a lot of stuff if you're just like straight up about what you're doing.
Well, I think it's really accurate what you're describing because it's something I've heard from so many of the artists that I worked with that were releasing music in 2021 and 2022, where they came into the space, they had this really amazing moment where they put out some music, they made more money than they've ever made before off a drop. And we're
Hmm.
not talking millions of dollars, we're talking like 5 grand, 10 grand, just more than they've ever seen from streaming. But then as they started to develop a brand in the space, I noticed that there was this sort of like this pressure that you just alluded to, right? Where it's like, you know, you sold more things. And as you sold more things, people had this expectation that all the things connected back to one another. And then they started to wonder, like, how am I going to make money off of this? And then the artist, I think, started to develop, and this is just my perspective from what I've heard. I don't want to speak for anyone else. They developed this, you know, this belief that the collectors were largely just there to want to flip their art and make money off of them. And I don't
Right.
think that that's true. You know, as a collector myself who had no expectation of making money from the things I was collecting, I don't think it was fully representative, but I do think they touched on probably the biggest challenge that people had with releasing art on chain is that they don't know, they don't want to develop that utility roadmap. They don't want to be giving people back all these different things. But at the same time, collectors are like, hey, if I'm spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on this art, like how do I see a return myself? Because I think for so many people, they're not in a financial position where they can just afford to just drop, you know, 2, 3 ETH on something that is just going to be um, a piece of their identity. Like they want to sell the thing for 2, 3 ETH for 10 ETH, you know? And so I feel like, I don't know if that like connects or lands in the way that you were thinking about it, but I've just noticed the spectrum where like the more successful you are in crypto, the more willing you are to just collect art for the sake of collecting art because you don't have an expectation of it being a profit driver. But I think for a lot of people who are new to the space and are collecting for the first time and trying to build out their portfolio, there is that kind of hope or that desire that this thing will go up 10x. And I think that's where these weird expectations kind of start to set in.
Yeah, I totally see that. I mean, this concept that we're talking about, um, I've like sat with this for like multiple years because prior to me releasing any art, I've seen that exact thing that you're talking about with other creators, and it's such a shame because like that burns down everything we're trying to build. Like,
Mm,
why would more artists come on chain then? Why would people create on chain if all that's going to happen is a flood of comments telling you that you fucking rugged them or something? Like,
mm-hmm.
this is not like not productive. So that's why like I take the approach of like being super transparent with what I'm providing. And I would really urge other artists to do the same, where there's this concept of like under promising and over delivering, right? Where like you never ever ever want to be in a situation where people are expecting you to do something that you have yourself alluded to, where like people feel like you extracted something from them. Like
Right.
I would much rather be 10 times less successful but feel like I'm giving people more value than I'm getting, because
Mm,
that feeling there is synergetic as an artist, and that feeling will allow you to create the best art possible, and eventually your art will speak for itself. So like I think the wrong like way to take it is like treating it like you can make a quick buck off of people, because people will know that too. Like if you're gonna rug someone, like it's very obvious when you're doing that, and then you ruin your whole reputation, right? Like for me personally, like I'm trying to be an artist for my whole life, like I'm just getting started, so my reputation is everything to me. So in order to like make sure that I uphold that, I do have this perspective or intention or like whatever, that I want to create dope shit for people, and then like the reward will be there, in the long run. And I think that's true for like any type of artist. I don't think that's true for like crypto specifically, right? Like when you're getting started out, you always have to have that like hungry mindset where you're doing something different and giving people something actually unique. And I don't think that like this is like the first conversation I'm doing about swatches, and clearly like the aesthetic or whatever has been put out there, like people receive. So I shouldn't even need to explain my work. Like it should
mm.
it should be there on its own.
How did that intention go into the go-to-market strategy for Swatches? Like, how did you think about starting that channel, releasing the landing page, doing
Yeah.
the kind of allow list that you did? Like, talk to me about the actual rollout of the project itself.
So the rollout started. I was strategizing with my homie Benji. I was on Farcaster before, but I hadn't really been like super deeply embedded into using the app. I was like mainly still on Twitter. But like a month prior to Swatches, I was really getting more like tapped into Farcaster and seeing like what's going on there, and like actually reading like a lot of the channels and realizing what a lot of people had already been telling me, that like the quality of conversation and like the context of things, and like it seems like a lot of like the what was going on in crypto was actually happening on Farcaster. So I was like talking to Benji, and maybe like we thought that one of the differentiators for Swatches could be that it was like a native Farcaster collection, essentially, where like the whole allow list is based on like people who are in the channel. Most of the comms will be going out in Farcaster. Like I still use Twitter, but it was more like a copy paste of my post that I was doing on Farcaster. Um, and that like concept is why Swatches was successful. And my hats off are to Benji, because that was his idea to like make Swatches like a Farcaster native collection. And I think that was really well received because it was something different happening on Farcaster. Like there was no like generative art collection channel that was going on at the time. So I think like just providing something new to the app, and then like kind of like positioning it as like the first of its kind in that sense too, attributed to some of its success, because like when you're scrolling the feed, you don't usually see stuff like swatches. So I think that like caught people's eye.
I think it's really valuable that you mentioned that because it's what grabbed my attention as well. You know, like the fact that this was being so well received by Farcaster, and I'm sure that you probably were doing stuff with it on Twitter as well. I just frankly have not really been using Twitter anymore. And so like my whole compass into like the art that I'm paying attention to and the collections I'm paying attention to stem from a very Farcaster native standpoint. And so when I saw you rolling out that channel, I played around with the site. I saw the kind of people that were talking about it. They kind of instantly built credibility for you and the project. And I think to your point about it being about the art and not anything else, the type of people that were talking about swatches, at least on my timeline, were not, you know, serial traders or like people that were trying to flip PFPs and stuff like that. Like they were just genuine good builders in the space, people who had a strong reputation. And I think that credibility made me feel confident to want to invest more time and energy into it, you know, get excited about the mint, be collecting the second that it dropped on secondary, and Yeah, I just want to give you a lot of kudos too, because I think you really went for it in terms of making it feel like a Farcaster native rollout. And I think that it connected in a really, really good way.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that.
And I feel like for me too, something that I've also been, I talked about this last week with Carlos on like the Farcaster index, but my whole like point of view on projects that are doing well within that ecosystem right now is that they've really taken an organic approach to building community in those pockets. And so if you look at something like Swatches, you look at something like Hire, Degen, or these other projects that are going on right now, it's kind of hard to describe from the outside like what it feels like to have a project start on Farcaster, but I think that there is something really powerful about it. And I guess I'd love to hear from your perspective. You mentioned that you were on Twitter a lot more before. Now you're spending more time on Farcaster. What did that transition look like? And what was it that kind of pulled you into wanting to make, for all intents and purposes, Farcaster kind of like the home base for the communications around Swatches?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I was using Twitter a lot before. I think like Twitter has consistently been going downhill for like the past year in terms of like the UX and like just the reliability of it. But the main like switch in my mind and like the reason why I think I initially felt like it was good and then continued to like kind of dogpile onto it was the quality of communication that I was having with people on Farcaster. Because like obviously there's way less bots on Farcaster compared to Twitter, and like the engagement felt real. And
Mm,
for Twitter, like I genuinely don't know how many of like my followers are bots versus like actual people. But on Farcaster, I can feel like what I'm putting out there and like the engagement I'm getting is an accurate reflection of what the actual community is feeling. So like I think the main value add for me for using Farcaster is it's just more accurate to like what's probably going on. And I
right.
think like that speaks volume to like people posting on there and like people wanting to be more involved. And like for me myself, like my Farcaster usage has like exponentially gone up in the past like 2 months just because of like that positive feedback loop. And I think that was like the main driver for me personally.
And how have you been enjoying watching people switch their PFPs to swatches and this whole like animated swatch movement that's kind of
It's
happening now with
dope. It's
people?
super dope. Yeah, I mean, like for me, I think like there's art in creating the collection, and then there's like this like meta art in being able to create something that people feel like they can own and remix themselves. Another one of my like all-time favorite collections is Opepen. And
Mm,
prior to making swatches, I've been a huge fan of Jack Butcher and just like Opepen in general. And I feel like there was like something kind of similar that was hitting with swatches in the sense that people want to remix them. So like people making their own animated PFPs and like relating their swatch to like another image to be like, this is like the color palette of this swatch in this image. Like I love seeing that stuff because like that stuff is there without the NFT, you know?
hmm.
So like it's kind of like what you were saying before with the music stuff, where like I'm obviously super deep into crypto and like I'm an NFT artist first before like being any other type of artist, but it's always nice when you feel like you made something that also is detached from the crypto world and it's kind of using stuff like base and L2 as like a back end to what your actual vision is.
Right.
So like that's really what I like was aiming for that. And I think like of all of my projects I've done in the past, I've been closer to hitting that in this. So it's super dope. Like it's awesome. I think the one thing is like Swatches was never made to be a PFP project. So I wish that like I think the animated swatches look really dope, but I want to like create something that is more PFP tailored within the
Mm.
Swatches universe. So that it's like it like like amplifies the like vibration of what that could be.
It's kind of funny though, because I feel like there's a beauty to that, where in the same way that people rock their squiggle as their PFP, on Twitter,
Yeah,
and then I even know
yeah,
people
yeah.
like Jack on Farcaster has his squiggle as his PFP. Like it's funny because it's so clearly not meant to be like a PFP that when you see it and you know what it is, it kind of like hits different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that.
And I guess I'm curious to hear, like, what was your emotional sentiment leading up to the launch? Obviously, the mint was pretty insane. I mean, from my perspective, the pre-sale sold out pretty quickly. The public sale was like the first second or something. Like, how did you feel leading up to that launch, and what was just kind of your general reaction as sort of the creator behind that?
Yeah, I mean, this was the first time I've made something this successful by far. Like not even close. So like leading up to the launch, I was like I thought it would mint out, but then I also wasn't sure because you never know. So like I tried to detach from the launch as much as possible and kind of just like be confident in what the art is and like, regardless of if it mints or if it doesn't mint, like I'm proud of my work. But then once the launch happened, I remember I was like on a call with some of my other friends that have been like huge supporters of mine in the past and have worked on me with like previous projects, but we were like all on like a FaceTime call, and the it was Thursday, which was the pre-sale, and the clock was about to hit noon, and we were like, oh fuck, what's gonna happen? And then instantly 10% were sold, and then I was like, holy shit, like that's crazy that right like when the clock hit noon, 10% happened, and already that was more like attention slash volume slash anything than I had ever gotten in my life combined from all of the
Mm,
NFTs I've made. So like that moment was really where I was like, I think, this project is something different and something that I'm proud to stand on. And like the main thing also for me is that, this whole thing, it's like a huge journey, right? Like Swatches is just an episode in my life. So it's rewarding to me to see that I'm at least uh, getting better each time. Like every project I release, it's better than the last. And that's all I can hope for.
100%. What was the decision for you to go with OpenSea as sort of a launch partner for the collection?
Well, at first I was gonna write the contract myself, but then I was just like getting a little lazy to do that, and then I wanted to like potentially leverage like a creator tool that was out there to shine light on it. So I was between a couple of them. Like I saw OpenSeas, and then there was a Nifty Kit, I think, and maybe one other one that I was considering. But I mainly went with OpenSeas because I didn't want people to get like scammed. And
Mm.
if the mint was on OpenSea, then it's like pretty credible that that's what's going on. So that was the main intention behind it. And their creator studio like satisfied all of the requirements that I needed in terms of like the allow list and the the contract was like instantly verified on Basecamp and stuff, so I was able to do some things there. But
Nice.
yeah.
It was definitely the first I'm gonna say this directly. It was the first OpenSea launch that I was excited about in like a really long time. And I feel like OpenSea had this like huge market share for such a long period of time. And if you had a collection that was like on the OpenSea launch pad, like it would be selling out instantly and whatnot. But just truthfully, I feel like over the last year or so, like the collections just kind of weren't hitting the same. Like they were trying to squeeze some life out of them. Very commonly what you would see is that a collection would be sold out and then be trading below floor like the next day. And the
Hmm.
vibe was just off. And so when I saw you doing it on OpenSea initially, my reaction was like, okay, that's pretty interesting. But if anything, it actually gave me more confidence in you giving them brand rep than the other way around, which is kind of like funny given like how giant OpenSea is a brand. But I feel like when you launch your collection on there, I was like, okay, OpenSea is like not dead because Swatches is like on there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel you. I mean, yeah, they were super helpful throughout the whole process. Like there was some issues going on during the launch where I don't know if you saw this, but like basically there was like a phishing attack for like an hour prior
Really?
to the public sale because the contract that like the version of the contract that was used for Swatches, OpenSea deployed and like finished releasing it like a day before Swatches came out.
Mm.
So I think there was a bug there or something, but yeah, like OpenSea was super responsive. They were super helpful, and obviously like the comms push was helpful as well. And like they told me that they would put it on the front page and stuff if I launched there, so it made sense from a collection perspective. And I think like being like OpenSea, my friend said this where he was like when Swatches was on the front page of OpenSea for the days that it was minting, it was like it's like you're on crypto Times Square and
Yeah.
like it's a funny analogy, but I think doing that gave the collection a lot of like brand recognition in a way, and like everyone that
Yep.
was a collector was super excited about that too because like you said, OpenSea is not a small marketplace by any means. And like going to OpenSea.io and seeing swatches was awesome, and I think that like actually connects back to the previous thing I was saying, where before I even got into crypto at all, the first website that I ever saw NFTs on was OpenSea. So it was kind of like a really cool, like closing the loop moment where, 4 years later, my collection was on the front page.
It's kind of a catch-22, in a lot of ways, because I totally agree with you that it's the most highly recognizable, best place to get attention on the project. But you also have this other side of it where most of the flippers, I would imagine, probably came from like just finding something on OpenSea, or someone that went into this with the intention of being like, okay, I want to buy this quote unquote hype launch and then sell it immediately
Yep.
after.
Yep.
It's weird, man. It's like it's this sweet spot for artists of trying to launch a collection that gets the eyeballs and the attention that it deserves. It has volume and it's quote unquote successful. You almost have to like roll the dice on like how much hype and speculation you're allowing to come in to be able to like balance and have it land in a place
Completely
that feels
agree.
authentic and organic.
Yeah, I mean that was the main, like what we were talking about, like leading up to the launch. Like that was the number one thing I wanted to do was like um for the allow list and like for the pre-sale. I wanted to get as many people that were interested in swatches for the right reasons in there as possible. So I can actually go into like what that looked like because that was a pretty fun process to put together. Um,
Yeah.
Essentially what I never publicly like stated what the requirements were to get on the pre-sale, but now the mint's over, we can go into it. But it was basically like anyone that had collected a Motorhead, they were allow listed. Anyone who had minted two or more of my Zora collections were allow listed. And then there was anyone who was in the Farcaster channel was allow listed. And then after that, there was a more granular approach that was taken. Because when I was strategizing like different ideas with Benji, we were like really trying to key in on like making swatches be like a Farcaster native collection. So I went into like a bunch of different channels and different like collections in Farcaster and like allow listed random people throughout those channels. So
Mm.
the first one was there's like this Farcaster OG collection that was created that Benji flagged to me, and I allow listed all of the Farcaster OGs into minting swatches because I was going after like that community essentially because
Yeah.
swatches was a Farcaster native community, and then we also ran like different like not contests but like Abel's the ability like ways to get on the mint list on six different Farcaster channels. So there's like if you were in higher, there was an opportunity for you to get on the allow list. Yellow, nouns, there's six and a couple others. Reply guys. So like I was really trying to like spread into those communities and like reward those active people in Farcaster to get on the allow list. But yeah, like you said, after that point, once it goes public, it kind of just you just pray for it.
Yeah, it was wild. That was the first collection that had sold out in like a second that I'd seen. Like I really like went back to 2021 mentality for a second there. I was like on the site, I was with my boys and we're like ready to go. I was like, here's the link, everyone be ready. I'm on a team call. I'm like, all right, guys, swatches and minting in 30. And then like first second, fucking sold out.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
Some crazy shit, honestly, especially for where we are in the market. Where like obviously things are picking back up for all intents and purposes, though. Like NFTs are not popping. You know what I mean? Like people are not
right,
like
right.
aping NFTs like they used to. So at least for me, when that moment happened, that was like a really big boost for me where I was just watching the floor, trying to snipe a bunch of shit. Things were moving. And then honestly, to OpenSea's credit, and this is actually where the layer two thing really stood out to me the most, is like you started to feel the significance of art being on L2 from the volume that was happening in real time immediately after the mint. You would see something get
Right.
listed and then
Yeah.
sold, listed and sold. And these transactions were just flying left and right. And I was like, holy shit, like this is actually different because you no longer have this like 30-second minute delay in between decisions. You're like really having to make literally real time
Yeah.
decisions
Yeah.
on
It's
the
it's
ones you wanted
happening
to buy.
live. Yeah. No, that's such a key thing to like hone in on because, um, I guess like I mean I've always wanted to be like a person that is creating art for L2 to like kind of build out that ecosystem. But I think that what you're saying specifically is like a very like big advantage to artists and just like collectors in general, like looking at L2 because I think as we see time goes on, like more and more collections will eventually end up on L2 and like the UX for just like a transaction perspective is so much better. So
And where do you think this goes now? Like going through that whole rollout you had, going through the mint, obviously there's so much that leads up to this big moment that is the mint itself. How do you think about, where you're at with the project now, what you want to spend your time on over the next couple of months here? Like what's kind of your general vibe with the project as a whole today?
yeah, yeah. So So now I'm kind of like in between ideas. I have a few different ideas that I don't want to share publicly, because like kind of alluding to our previous conversation, the under promise, over deliver thing. But I'm really the guiding principles for me for like what to do next is going to be largely driven by what response I see from the actual community in the Farcaster channel. So to not give too much away, like I'm seeing a lot of people wanting to like create their own swatches. So I think like that's a pretty cool concept because the collection as it stands, there obviously are these individual like images and like canvases that exist, but taking that as a like framework for creating art in general is very interesting to me. So like imagine like I have like 100 one of ones, right? But it would be awesome if like I empowered people to kind of create their own one of ones in a sense
Hmm.
in a swatches style. So that's like something that I'm actively thinking about. And then also I want to like create more art in this style as well. So like the CryptoPunk thing, I'm kind of just like spitballing ideas and seeing what the reaction is and seeing like what people actually want. So it'll be a very collaborative process with the community from here on out. Because I like now it's Swatches has gone from my brain to the public. So I think it will exist in that realm from now on. And apart from that too, there are a bunch of other like community members that have created like Swatch derivative stuff already, which I think is super sick to see, and like definitely want to be promoting and helping that in any way I can. There was like one frame that stood out to me in particular, which was the higher frame that I think his name is Nick Toon on Farcaster, but he created this frame where you could basically like impose like higher arrows on your swatches, and like that kind of stuff. Like people are like doing that and like asking me if they like it's okay for them to do that, or if they can mint it, do they have my permission? Like I don't give a fuck, do whatever you want. Like it is yours. Like go like make a higher frame, make your own mint, don't include me. Like this is like a completely open thing, so like for me it's just rewarding to see it happen. So I definitely want to like encourage people and like promote that kind of culture within Swatches, that like there's ownership in the community for yourself too. Like I don't need to be attributed if you make Swatch derivative art. Like it's like a simple shapes and colors. Like I'm not trying to extract value from people like that.
Well, I think it's a big reason why I've become such a big advocate for the collection, because I feel like you really understand the ethos of what it means to build in this world, and really just share the values, share the mission, be open source with it, allow people to do what they want, remix it, etc. So honestly, man, I'm pretty stoked that you were down to hop on the podcast, because I know that I just personally had so many questions about it and wanted to learn more about you. But if anything, this has really just even further solidified my belief in you and your career as an on-chain artist. So thank you for coming on, man. I mean, it's been an amazing conversation. And I guess as a closing question, I'd love to ask you where people can keep up with your work, and then maybe some things that they should keep an eye out for in the next couple of weeks here.
Yeah, for sure. Likewise, man. Like it's been a pretty cool journey so far, and it really hasn't been that much time since Swatches has been out there, and like the response it's gotten and the amount of energy it's created is really fueling to me as an artist, and really making me optimistic about the future of like where this can go, whether it be Swatches or like whatever 100 other projects I do in the future. So I appreciate that. But yeah, to keep up, I would mainly say like Farcaster is, I mean, obviously from what we talked about in the conversation, Farcaster is like the main thing that I'm like posting updates on. There's like a Swatches channel, backslash Swatches, that's the one that I maintain. There's also a community made channel like called, let me see one second, Swatch Collective, that was started by
Mm-hmm.
some of the community members. I'm not like directly modding that or anything, but I do pop in there from time to time. And then yeah, following me on Farcaster is just at jvmi. And then I do post on Twitter sometimes, but usually that's like a copy paste from what's going on in Farcaster.
Classic. That's awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on the pod. This has been an amazing episode. I know you got a very bright future ahead of you and a lot more collections to come. So until next time, we'll have to catch back up and run it back for the next one.
Hell yeah, appreciate it, man.
All right, everyone. We'll chat with you next week.